So when I started my journey, it was about how can I infuse cocktails, my heritage, as well as the style of creating drinks in an African way. Tell whole stories of our heritage, our culture, and where we come from through my medium, which is a drink. To spread the message of how holistic health and wellness, as well as celebration, can be incorporated in the way we communicate, the way we commune. I come from a very multi background, and I'm like, okay, let me make something that tells the story of where I come from.
Of the IMM Friday Flash Talk. And today we are obviously celebrating being Women's Month and everything. We're going to be we've got an awesome guest that you have. You've already seen the flyers, I suppose, out there. And are looking forward, I imagine, to what's going to be coming over here. But otherwise, just by way of overview, this is just a once a month thing that we do on the first Friday. Just for the first 15, 20 minutes or so, just as a snack bite, essentially your lunchtime, just very quickly delve into some good issues that will obviously help you career-wise and, of course, to sharpen your professional adage as well.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I'm very happy to be here today.
All right. Otherwise, yeah, the floor is yours,
Thank
Lucia.
you.
Go for it.
As we're celebrating Women's Month, I'd like to share a bit about what I see from a perspective of a mixologist about why African stories, African brands, and how women leaders are driving value creation through the sovereign narrative. I want to begin with a short question. Please do chat in the box. It's just a short, quick question. Press like, raise your hand if a brand, a product, a campaign, or an organization has ever made you feel truly seen. Not as a market, not as a trend, but as a people. Awesome. I'm sure we do have, that feeling of trust within the brands that we see online, on television, and whatever medium is available to us. I'd like us to tap into that feeling of being truly seen in the quiet recognition of our realities, the sharp edge of our humor, the weight of our story, and the quiet fire of our aspirations, seen without the filter of someone else's glaze, but seen finally on our own terms. That feeling is probably what made you trust the brand more or stay and watch a little bit longer and even speak about them positively. That moment of recognition is more powerful than most people realize. It's rarely accidental. It's often the quiet work of powerful women leaders across this continent who practice the sovereign narrative, which is the power to author, to own, and to deliver that authentic African story that creates real value. Women do this across sectors in marketing, in finance, in technology, manufacturing, and even in tourism. Today, we celebrate her this month. We celebrate us by looking at a deeper impact, and let's draw a few practical lessons that any organization can use by this example. Number one, the power of African storytelling. Africa is one of the most dynamic growth regions where consumers, talent, investors, and partners increasingly reward organizations to speak with cultural fluency and honesty. With African storytelling, it builds trust, emotional connection, and differentiation. When stories are grounded in our local languages, lived experiences, our humor, our values, and context, rather than imported templates and flattened African tropes, engagement and loyalty actually rise. Research consistently shows us that authentic story-driven content outperforms like general or generic messaging with African audiences specifically. But this is where most people miss it. Cultural storying has an emotional infrastructure. People don't only buy products and our services, they buy the feeling of, being understood, of being seen. And when an organization reflects real life humor, caution, pride, and even the unspoken rules, it lowers the emotional cost of engagement. People relax, they stay, they return. And when the story feels foreign and generic, there's a small distance that remains. And that distance quietly compounds into lost loyalty and even weaker relationships. Ignoring cultural storytelling also creates that silent tax. It shows up as higher marketing spend to achieve the same results, lower staff pride, and even slower word of mouth. And campaigns that look too polished, they feel empty. But many organizations pay this tax without even being able to name what it is. You know, Cultural storytelling also tells, it carries integral knowledge in terms of ways of relating, showing respect, building trust, and navigating difficulty. When these are overlooked in favor of external templates, organizations lose access to the wisdom that already exists in our communities and the communities that they serve. And finally, for storytelling, it shapes who feels allowed to belong and to lead. And the women are doing this by having deep, dignified African stories expand the circle of people who see themselves as the rightful participants. This also allows that, it keeps the thin or borrowed stories, from shrinking that circle. The sovereign narrative is an action. Africans can define their stories for African and also international audience, and this increases the value because most people invest into its meaning as much as they do buy into the products and the services. The second aspect that I would like to highlight from the lessons that we can learn from women-led organizations is how the women raise standards by refusing to ignore that cultural storytelling. Women from major parts of the African workforce and a growing share of leadership, they have a growing share of leadership ambition. And for example, in South Africa's hospitality sector, a 2024 survey by Fedesa found that nearly 40% of women targets leadership roles and 11% plan to start their own businesses within the 3 to 5 year gap, like despite the challenges that they may face. And we see similar patterns in high ambition and deep experience across other industries as well. Globally, companies with gender diverse executive teams are 25% more likely to achieve above average profitability, and that's what McKinsey says. In Africa, women leaders are frequently elevating their standards by prioritizing empathy, cultural nuance, and community connection and long term relationship building. And those are very important aspects. What is less discussed is the particular impact of women who simply refuse to ignore cultural storytelling. They notice the small frictions that others overlook, and when a message feels slightly off, when a campaign erases rather than elevates, and when an experience leaving people feeling cold, even though the numbers look acceptable. Women protect the nuance. They ask different questions. They hold space for emotional and relational dimensions of organizational life. And in doing so, it protects long term brand equity, strengthens the internal culture, and expands the relevance. Like the third one that I can say in brief is what people can take from women led work is understanding the treating of internal culture and external messages as one continuous story. Authenticity that works in a campaign must also survive the customer's first interaction and also the way an employee is able to retell that story with pride. And I feel like this is not just a soft skill. These are competitive advantages in markets where consumers and can use talent and increase to choose authenticity over a generic story. So In closing, I would really like to celebrate the women who are already leading this work across industries, the marketers, operators, founders, strategists, and the culture shapers. Please support their visibility, their mentorship, and their presence at decision-making tables. And for every organization that's in this room, ask yourselves whether the narrative is truly sovereign. Is it owned? Is it authored? And is it delivered with African authenticity that we expect? Or we're still borrowing it? So, and with that, I'd really like to say Happy Women's Month. And thank you so much for being here with me in this very short session. Over to you, Ronald.
Thanks very much, Lucy. I think that was precinct, that was perfect, that was on point and challenging, I think, from our perspective as well, in terms of what we're looking for regarding the authenticity bit that you speak of there. But I've got a question, I think, and if you do have a question, you were listening in as Lucy was talking, you're thinking, but how do we do this? Blah, blah, blah. If you've got any questions, please just type it up in the public chat box over there, and Lucy will be able to deal with it as soon as it comes through. But before they do that, and whilst you're doing that or typing your question, I think I've got one of my own, Lucy, and it talks primarily to the whole authenticity of storytelling that you touched on earlier on. Now, how can brands, I think from an African perspective, from an African heritage and culture, be presented in such a way that feels authentic rather than performative? So just to almost dive into that very first point of yours of authenticity. And I think the background of this, if I can just give, is essentially you've seen, those Masuti blankets in Black Panther and the whole scandal around that. We've seen Louis Vuitton using those Maasai cloths in their expensive designs without paying back any money to the Maasai in Kenya. What do we do? How do we actually then deal with this authenticity issue, Lucy?
I think diversification instead of using the generic narrative. For example, we say we are proudly African, but what are the elements within our marketing strategy that show those little aspects? For example, using humor, using our childhood stories, using how we've been raised by our grandmothers, of which you can use other examples. But just to answer your question, immersing ourselves in what exactly it is that we are telling the rest of the world about what it means to be proudly African. Instead of just having it as a slogan, how can we put it in our culture to say, according to the culture that we've been raised by as Africans, how can we organize ourselves in our companies, in the structure of our work, how we speak to each other, and how we put the message across in our marketing style in a way that also highlights the importance of being African and the stories, therefore. So, yeah, it's something that we can, instead of always taking something from the West, we can also tell our side of the story of how we are experiencing that particular service, product, or the messaging in itself. I hope that answers you.
It does to an extent, and I think the poll has just gone live. If you're watching, there's a poll you can see on your screen. You can just click on answer now and give us your answer. And like I said, you've got the opportunity to actually ask Lucy questions at the moment. As of now, I haven't seen any coming through, but I think my follow-up to that, Lucy, is organizations generally are chasing profit. Yeah, we want to make the money. And so if our campaign incorporates some of these artistic African elements, as it were, without the heart of actually authentically telling the story. In other words, just for show, so that we can make money and tick the box. Doesn't that make a difference on the bottom line anyway, even if we are not authentic about it? I think that's a question that potentially some people would want to ask up there.
The base and the highlight of this is to be authentic by telling the story that will connect us to the rest of the world. So that if we are not authentic about what we are going through in the journey of actually building that business, then what are we saying to the rest of the world? I feel like as an entrepreneur and other entrepreneurs out there who are looking at this whole bottom line strategy, I think it's great to just share about what you're going through as a company, as an organization. We've had a lot of examples of for example, in my industry, in the beverage industry, talking the story about Johnny Walker and how it was very difficult for him to get his product out because he was a tea merchant before he became a blender, a whiskey blender. that story in itself, it's supposed to be something that connects me with my customer to say, okay, this is what I went through and this is where I am today. If that is relevant or culturally relevant to somebody else, it should not be a problem to ask them or to let them help me build what I am building. And as a community, if we put it in a community structure, that also helps us support each other's businesses because we know exactly what this person went through. And that's through the authentic cultural or just the basic storytelling. So it should balance itself out as we move through, the organizational phases, the money, the profitability, and also scaling. And yeah, I feel like if we do it the African way, it also gives us, an understanding of how we can do that for ourselves and the rest of the world. There's a question here: is there a pan-African voice given that culture between individual African countries, regions can vary quite markedly? Please, could you kindly clarify that question for me, Ronald?
Right. So I think what Mike, I'm not sure, Mike, if your microphone is working, Mike, the mic, if your mic, but otherwise, I think from what I'm understanding, he wants to know that is there perhaps a voice that can speak across the continental barriers that we have, given the context, obviously, of the individual African countries and regions are different in terms of their languages, in terms of their culture, etc., etc. So can we speak almost on a one voice perspective? I think that's what Mike is saying from if I get it right. I don't know if that makes any sense, Lucy.
Yes. We can have a Pan-African voice, but remember that in each background that we have, it's different. The stories are not going to be the same. What I'm going through in Uganda and what I'm going through in South Africa and what I'm going through in Malawi is not going to be the same. But if we share our stories based on our experiences and based on what we've seen, our neighbors go through, I think it can, open up the conversation. Having one particular voice is great in terms of our messaging, but it's also great to see different voices come up on what they've been going through. Our experiences as Africans are not the same. So it will vary, but we can also work on having a voice that can then spread the message that we require the rest of the world to see. And I feel like that's a very important question because those are one of the things that we need to work on.
I think yeah, you put it very great there because I think ultimately, from Mike's perspective, and I think just to try and globalize the issue of African identity, that the people outside this continent have a jaundiced view, if I can just broadly call it that, where Africa is just
Mhm.
one thing, one culture,
It's
one country, and
exactly.
unfortunately,
So if we spread that and share the different experiences, I think there'll be more a culturally immersive voice that shows people our different colors, our different patterns, our different lifestyle, our different, upbringings, our food, our music, our vibes, and the way we actually market our work and what we want people to know about us. So that's a very great question, Mike. Thank you so much for that.
I suppose next time Mike is traveling in Europe, they won't be asking him, "Oh, but I've got a friend called Nia staying in Kenya. Do you know them?" Uh, but otherwise, I think if there's more questions, please continue to type them along. Please take the poll as well that's fishing on your screen. We've got a few more minutes to go. And if I'm just waiting for another question, I've got a question here for you, Lucinda. I think apart from Bantu Mixology, which clearly has done well to elevate and showcase that African branding, if you may, could you please share an example, if any, of an African brand that has successfully used that sort of narrative to build customer trust competitively so?
I think for me, I like to deal with different brands and different media houses. For me, it's the Ebony Life Media. If I'll just give a shout out to them, Mo Abudu, the lady from Nigeria, has clearly outlined, you know, storytelling through film and television in a way that the rest of the world can actually see and be immersed in what it is to be a true African. And then for me, another person, or I'd say, is Fin Group, Jennifer Hughes. These are the women who I really, really look up to, in not necessarily as a brand, but as people who've shown how those experiences can elevate our cultural sensory storytelling and work. So it's in media, it's in beverage programs, it's in, you know, hotels, it's in different parts of different industries. And for me, it's not necessarily brands, because I look at the people behind, the women behind that entire curation, you know, of the story and exactly what we want to experience. I hope that answers you. I don't want to be in trouble with some brands for not giving them a shout out, so I'm going to leave that one open.
No, they should pay you. They should pay you for that. Nothing for
Yes.
Mahala, yeah? Otherwise, I think that's it from my side. I don't know if there's any other questions. I don't see any on the box, but perhaps any last words from you, Lucy, in this quick power of ours. Any last words that you want to give, perhaps before we kind of wrap it up from our
Yes,
perspective?
I'm sure people are wondering what a Bantu mixologist is. I haven't really gotten a moment to actually explain what that concept is. It is Bantu mixology is a contemporary mixological practice that systemically integrates indigenous Bantu ethnobotanical knowledge, regional African botanicals, and a traditional way of preparing those herbs, using cocktail techniques that are modern and culturally grounded to create functional beverages. So it's just us honoring where we come from as Africans in terms of how we celebrate and enjoy socially our drinks, our food, and our, you know, and our culture, and integrating that in a way we can share our stories. So as Mike was also asking for the voice, my voice in this whole thing is the cocktail, which is the medium that I have chosen to speak about these cultural nuances.
All right, thank you very much for that. I think there's a comment coming through here from Sabrina saying, "Keep it up, what you're
Yes,
doing." As you said, all our stories and voices matter so that we can educate and share more with the world. So well done with that, Lucy,
absolutely.
and congratulations on that.
Thank you so
All
much,
right. Well,
Ronald.
otherwise, that's it from my side. I think we've got a bit of a 2 minutes. If you still have 2 minutes, if you are online and you've got 2 minutes. Oh, by the way, Lucy, I noticed the numbers went up as the show was going on. So I think people were just telling their friends, hey, 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 come watch Lucy, come watch Lucy. So the viewership numbers have kind of gone up as the conversation progressed. So well done with that.
It's always last
But
minute.
yeah, you can say that again. All right, so I think we've got a video that we're going to play before we jump off. Jason, if you can just jump in and just play snippets of the previous conversations in case people want to catch up on what's happened thus far. So I'll just hand over to Jason at the moment. Jason, over to you, sir.
Is artificial intelligence replacing us or empowering us?
How brands adopt artificial intelligence strategically. Are we adopting it in a clever way? Our jobs, our professions are changing. And in 5 years' time, up to 70% of the skills that we currently have needs to change in order for us to obviously exist effectively. The rise of AI is not about replacing humans, but it is rather about enhancing the ability for us to create, enhancing the ability for us to connect, and enhancing the ability for us to innovate.
This is the fastest growing and changing ecosystem that the world has ever seen in the history of the world. This is the next evolution. How AI agents are actually reshaping the way we shop. 45% of the buying journey is now managed by AI. AI is doing all the research when you want to buy a product, which is the big thing. We know companies like Shopify and Etsy are already starting to bake AI into their platforms as well. The customer journeys change. You need, as a marketer or retailer, to make sure that the infrastructure that your e-commerce platform runs on top of can support the findability of your catalog via AI. If your platform doesn't support AI, are you even relevant?
Something that you want to do with her. Otherwise, I think from our side, from the IMM Institute, thank you very much for coming through. Appreciate your contributions, appreciate your time, and this lunch hour power is pretty much done with this flash talk. And thank you very much for everybody for joining. Adios, amigos.